Book of Beginnings, Lesson 20, A Wife for Jacob. I'm hoping tonight we'll get through a couple of chapters at least. We're getting into the part of Genesis when we can take bigger bites of it at a time, hopefully, and we'll see how it goes tonight. But we're going to be in the 28th chapter, but I'm going to start us off at the end of the 27th chapter, where we ended the last time with what Rebekah said. Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm sick of my life because of these Hittite women. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like one of them, what good is my life?" So who were the Hittites and why were they such a problem? Now we can discuss different things about what she's saying in a minute. But in order to get us an idea of where we're talking about, I've got two maps over here so that we can cover two different things. If you look down here, it says Hittites. And if you look up here, it says Hittites. Or there were two different Hittite kingdoms, and the northern one played out before the one that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is the one that we're going to be talking about because this area is where Abraham and Isaac, and this is where Isaac was living, Isaac and Rebekah. So that would be the Hittites would be this group of people here. And you can see it on this one, helps you a little bit. This shows the journey of Isaac, of Abraham's servant, to find Isaac a wife, that he came from all the way down here, which is over in here. This is by the Dead Sea, and each one of the Dead Sea. And it will all the way up to Haran, and then back down from there to get a wife for Rebekah. So that helps me to picture where we're talking about and what group of people we're talking about. So what kind of people is in this particular area? And before we get to that, I want to do a comparison, and you probably can't see it well enough to tell this, but if you look at it, the red line is the journeys of Abraham, the purple line is the journeys of Isaac, and the blue line is the journeys of Jacob. And you can see that Abraham, he started all the way over in here, came up to Haran, down here, and sent back to get a wife for Isaac. And all. So he did a lot of traveling. He went all the way down into Egypt, because you remember reading about that. And then when you get to Isaac, if you look, all of his traveling he was the least traveled out of the three of them. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he lived in this area and stayed in this area. He stayed put more than the rest of them. So he would have been more familiar, I would think, with the local people in that particular area. And the area that he was in all of this is in the land of Canaan. So we'll go back to Genesis 24:3. "I will have you swear by the Lord, God of heaven and God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live, but will go to my land and my family to take a wife for my son Isaac." And that's what we talked about the last time, that he sent back to get his son Isaac a wife. It turned out to be Rebekah. But you see, he's telling him the same thing. He doesn't want him marrying into the Canaanites. So there must be something that's important for us to look at here and see why he's telling them this. Because he told him not to take one there, and we know that his grandson now is going to wind up getting a wife from somewhere besides in this area of Canaan, because the Hittites were in the land of Canaan along with several different people. It wasn't just one nation of Canaan, it was an area of Canaan and the Canaanite people. But along with them, there was a group that were called the Canaanites, as well as the Hittites and so on, that we'll look at in a minute. So we'll go back to the scripture that I just started with, 27:4. "So Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm sick of my life because of these Hittite women. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like one of them, what good is my life?" Now, she might be carrying a little bit too far there, but she's putting some heat on Isaac. She wants him to send his son somewhere else to get a wife. And we'll talk about that as we get there. So what was wrong with the Canaanite people, which included the Hittites along with a lot of others, what was wrong with them in particular? Now we're going to move forward to the 15th chapter of Genesis. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So all this land, he's told Abraham, this is going to be given to your descendants after you. Well, still at this particular time that we're talking about, Isaac was just a small group of people in this one area among the Hittite peoples in the area that I just showed you. If you go up, so to kind of narrow this down a little bit, we're going to step forward a little bit into the book of Deuteronomy 7:1. It says this: when the Lord your God brings you into the land, and now he's talking to the children of Israel, and when they're coming out of Egypt and they're going back to the promised land, this is what he said to them. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and he drives out many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. I thought I already said that. There's Girgashites. Okay. 7 nations more numerous and powerful than you. So the nations there are more powerful than them. So still we're talking about the same group of people. Then in Deuteronomy 7:3 it says, do not intermarry with them. He says, do not intermarry with them. That's pretty plain. And why? He said, do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. So what's important now? We have the Abrahamic covenant, and we had the birthright that passed that to Isaac, and that birthright is being passed on to Jacob. So you have to protect that birthright in order for the covenant to stay in effect, so you don't turn into other gods. Because they will turn your sons away from me to worship other gods. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you, and he will swiftly destroy you. Instead, this is what you are to do to them. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn up their carved images. For you are a holy people. He's saying, destroy all of their gods and all of their idols, everything that's of this nation, you destroy them. It's what he's telling. That's what Moses is telling them, what God is telling Moses to tell his people. You tear down all of these things. Don't leave anything here of any of this. But the time frame we're talking about with Isaac, there's still a small group of people. According to historical revisionists, this is what they say. They say gentle nature worshiping polytheistic societies such as Canaan were supplanted by aggressive monotheistic cultures like the Hebrews, which were less tolerant, sexually repressive, and warlike. Well, if you want to hear something similar to that, listen to what people are saying about the nation of Israel now and about the Palestinian, quote, Palestinian people. Also, if you want to go back in history a little bit, what do the revisionist historians want to tell you about, quote, the Native Americans? We always called them Indians, and we thought that was fine, and it was for many, many hundreds of years, and all of a sudden you can't call them Indians, you have to call them Native Americans. But what's the image that the revisionist historians paint of these people? They were peace-loving. They were one with nature. They were just wholesome, nice people. And these evil Europeans came over here and killed them off, destroyed them, stole all their land, and all. And this is what you hear. Okay, read history, read real history, and the accounts of what happened at that time. There is not. Just like in the land of Canaan, there was no homogeneous people that were all Canaanites. There were many different nations, many different people there, the Girgashites, the Hittites, all of them were in this area. If you say, well, we ought to give the land back to the Native Americans. Well, okay, which ones? Which tribe? Which one would you give it to? And he said, well, they're just these peace-loving people you should be given. And you think, okay, what were they doing before the Europeans ever got here? They were conquering each other. They were taking each other's lands. They were killing each other's children. They were brutalizing them. Some of the things you can... how would you like this? This is of this peace-loving, nice people that we're talking about, the Native Americans, what they would do to some other tribes when they would conquer them. If they wanted to torture you, they'd tie you down on top of an anthill and cut your eyelids off so you couldn't blink your eyes. Does that sound like a sweet bunch of people? Now, what does it amount to? There were some good ones and there were some bad ones. There were some very good ones and there were some very bad ones. It's not a homogeneous group of people. So we're talking about the thing. Here these revisionists are trying to say the Canaanite people were just such loving, wonderful people, and the Hebrews came in, this bunch of Jews came in and took their land away from them. Is that what happened? No, that's not what happened. The major deities of the Canaanite pantheon were El, Baal, and Asherah. El was the father of the gods and the creator of the world. Baal was the god of storms and fertility and was often depicted holding a thunderbolt. Asherah was the goddess of fertility and motherhood and was often depicted as a tree or a pole. This is a small portion of them. Now, in addition to these major deities, the Canaanite pantheon, so you're talking about all these groups of people worship some of the same gods, and some they would worship other people's gods. They would even, when the Hebrew people came in there, they would worship your God if they could worship their God as well, because and they thought your God was maybe the God of war, and their God was the God of fertility, and there's so all different ones. And so the lesser known ones, Dagon, the god of agriculture and fertility, Anat, the goddess of war and hunting, and Mot, the god of death and the underworld. There are also a number of minor deities. So even with all these, there were loads and many gods, and we have no way of knowing to this day what all gods they did worship, but they worshiped a bunch of different ones. Why is it so bad that they worship a bunch of gods? First place is, and remember, God told his people, do not worship these gods. You worship the one and only God. If you're worshiping a God besides the God of heaven, what are you worshiping? Could be a demon. Could be just a false god. Could be something you've made up. Could be, they thought, like in Egypt, the Pharaoh was a god. It was, I'm quite sure it was a different period because Egypt has a very long history. If you were the Pharaoh's wife, you didn't want the Pharaoh to die, because if he had 5 wives, when he died, you killed all 5 of his wives and put them in the tomb with him, because they got to attend to him in the afterlife. And then they put food in there, and they put some of his weapons in there, and his tools, and all this kind of stuff to have all. So you can get into some strange, crazy things. So, says the Bible paints a picture of the Canaanite society that dominated the religious atmosphere, religious people of this particular area. But they also demanded human sacrifice. Now, there was American Indians that did human sacrifice. We won't get into all that, but they did. And it's stated here, Jeremiah 19:5 says, they built the high places of Baal in order to burn their sons in the fire as whole burnt offerings to Baal, something that I had not commanded or spoken of, and that had never even come into my heart. So they were sacrificing human beings, and it gets even worse. The Bible is clear that the child sacrifice is one thing it did. The scripture from Deuteronomy says, they do for their gods every detestable thing that Jehovah hates, even burning their sons and their daughters in the fire of their gods. Burning their sons and daughters in the fire of their gods. And the question I put there, did the Canaanites really ritually burn their children? The revisionists say no. So, what does the facts say? Well, forget about what the revisionists say. What do the facts say? Josiah, King Josiah, was the king of Judah, of the split kingdom. He was the king of Judah, and he was one of the good ones. Of Israel and Judah, they had few good ones, but he was one of the good ones. And it says, this is what he did. He also made unfit for worship Topheth, which is in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, so that no one could make his son or his daughter pass through the fire of Molech. So even up until that particular time, they were still sacrificing their children to their gods. Now, some of what I'm getting to just a minute is going to be brutal, but we need to see the facts of what's here. So the other Canaanite places of worship in Israel that had been identified have not yet yielded evidence of child sacrifice. So that's true. A lot of in this particular area has not yielded any evidence of that at all. He said, but there's a reason. I've got a footnote there. And they say it's been it's exaggerated or whatever. And the footnote says, this is what my footnote says, the first archaeological work of the Judean city of Gezer, or Gezer, in the early 20th century revealed several burial jars full of bones of infants buried underneath standing stones. Robert McAllister is the one that did that, but when he did that, his techniques, his technology and everything was not quite up to par, and he was and he did his primitive way he did it. He didn't do a good job of recording what he had found. So what can we know? Canaanite civilization was largely driven out of Israel. When you drove them out of Israel, where did the Canaanites go? They went to colonies on the north of Africa, and one of the places was Carthage. So these Hittite people, these Canaanite people who had been run out of this land to the land of where they called Carthage, it's not now. There's several nations across there, but to Carthage. So these are Canaanite people, the same people that we're talking about now. So what does it say in the findings that we found there? Clitarchus, 4th century BC, said this concerning the Carthaginian practice. There stands in their midst a bronze statue of Kronos, its hands extended over a bronze brazier, the flames of which engulf the child. When the flames fall upon the body, the limbs contract and the open mouth seems almost to be laughing until the contracted body slips quietly into the brazier. Does this sound like civilized people? Thus it is that the grin is known as the sardonic laughter, since they die laughing. This is nice folks, right? Now this is people you want your family marrying into. Another Greek historian, Diodorus Siculus, this is what he wrote about 100 years after the fall of Carthage. There was in their city a bronze image of Kronos, extending its hands, palms up and sloping toward the ground, so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. Not only were they doing human sacrifice, they were sacrificing their own children to their God. What kind of God do you have if you have to burn your children up as a sacrifice to them? I'm talking about babies. I'm talking about infants. I'm talking about very small children. And this is the same people that were forced out of Canaan because of these evil Hebrew people that he just talked about. Anyway, the archaeological findings that we have, if you study them and you look at what happened, you can see what the Canaanite people were doing. You can see the gods that they were worshiping. You can see the practices they had, and they were a very, very brutal people. Now, does this seem like, the question I have, does this seem like somebody you want your family to marry into to carry the birthright down to the next generation? I don't think so. So, let's go back where we started. Genesis 27:46. So Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm sick of my life because of these Hittite women. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like one of them, what good is my life? What's another reason that she would want to send Jacob off somewhere else? Because Esau said he's going to kill him. And Jacob is her favorite out of the two of them. If you have more than one child, you shouldn't have favorites. But in this case, she did, and Isaac did, and it was the opposite one. But so it could be she was wanting to protect him. But what did she do? She said, she told the truth here. The Hittite women, they're just going to make a mess of it. What had happened, Esau had married two Hittite women. So how concerned was he about the birthright that he sold and the blessing that he went back in to get after he had sold the birthright? And so Isaac summoned Jacob, blessed him, and commanded him, don't take a wife from the Canaanite women. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father. Marry one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Slip down to the 5th verse. So Isaac sent Jacob to Padan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. So he's sending him off to get him a wife from his family. How far was that? You remember on the map, you saw how far they traveled? That's about 500 or 600 miles he's sending him in the days when you walk or ride a camel or a horse. It's about 500 or 600 miles to that land to get him a wife. Now, he wanted a wife pretty bad to go that far. Now, I'd have traveled 1,000 miles to get Diana. I just want you to understand that before I'm about to get myself in trouble. So, he sent him off. Esau, notice now, I just put this in here because I want you to look at Esau was not a bad man necessarily, but he didn't understand the birthright. He didn't understand the covenant. He didn't understand it at all, and this scripture is more proof of it. Look what it says. Esau noticed that Isaac blessed Jacob and sent him to Padan Aram to get a wife there. When he blessed him, Isaac commanded Jacob, do not marry a Canaanite woman. And Jacob listened to his father and mother and went to Padan Aram. Esau realized that his father Isaac disapproved of the Canaanite women. So Esau, he said, man, well, the reason that I'm falling out in my family, my mother and father, is because I married these Canaanite women. So I'm going to make it right. I'm going to fix it up. 9th verse. So Esau went to Ishmael and married, in addition to his other wives, he married one of the descendants of Ishmael. Now, what does Ishmael have to do with the covenant? Nothing. Isaac was the son of promise, but he said, my problem is, the reason my parents don't like me is because I didn't marry inside the family. I married other people other than inside the family. So he's got it figured out. So he marries another one. So did he fix anything? No. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He reached a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took one of the stones, and I like this. He took one of the stones from the place, put it there at his head, and lay down in that place. Now, if you used a stone for a pillow, what kind of dreams would you have? I'm not saying that's the reason you had your dream. 12th verse. And he dreamed a stairway was set on the ground, with its top reaching heaven, and God's angels were going up and down on it. This is what he dreamed. This is what he saw in his dream. So, 13th verse says, Yahweh was standing there beside him, saying, I am Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. I will give you and your offspring the land that you are now sleeping on. I'm going to give you this land. So, the place where he was right here. He had come from here. And now he'd made it up to there. And down here you can see it's here. And it gives you a little different view of it. And you can see it's over here by the Dead Sea. Down here is where they were living. And he had made it up this far. And this is when he used a stone for his pillow and had a dream. And saw angels going up and down. And so he came up. So he arrived at the only conclusion that anybody would arrive at. Notice the name of that is Bethel or Bethel. What does Bethel mean or Bethel mean? What does Beth mean in the Hebrew? It means house. House of, and El means God. So he named it Bethel, Bethel, house of God, is what he named the place. He thought this was God's house. It had to be with angels all over the place. So When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He was afraid and said, "What an awesome place this is. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." If he'd have slept anywhere else, wouldn't he have had the same dream? God wasn't saying, "This is my house. This is a special place." It had special meaning in many different ways, but it wasn't what he thought. He said, "This must be God's house." We're always trying. Human beings are constantly trying to bring God down here so we can understand Him, instead of raising ourselves up to where God is so we can understand Him. We do it opposite, and He was doing it back then. It hasn't changed. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that was near his head and set it up as a marker. He poured oil on top of it, and he named the place Bethel, though previously the city was named Luz. So he named it the house of God. This is God's house. Every time he goes through there, this is God's house. It was kind of strange. You're out there and everything, there's nothing around you at all, but this is God's house. Where's God's house? He's right here now. So now we go to the 29th chapter, first verse. I told you we'd try to get through 2 chapters. Jacob resumed his journey and went to the eastern country. He looked and saw a well in the field. And slipped down to the 4th verse. Jacob asked the men at the well, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they answered. "Do you know Laban, grandson of Nahor?" Jacob asked them. They answered, "We know him." "Is he well?" Jacob asked. "Yes," they said. "And here is his daughter Rachel coming with his sheep." So here comes Rachel. He's standing out there, and here comes Rachel. And he was smitten by Rachel. It's like the first time I saw Diana, I was smitten. First time. And you know what I really thought? I said, "I bet you that girl would turn into a good accountant." That's what I was thinking. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older was named Leah, and the younger was named Rachel. Now listen to this phrase. I'm going to give it to you in 3 different translations here in a minute. Leah had ordinary eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered Laban, "I will work for you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Now what I left out there was he had come to Laban's house and he had taken him in. He was working for Laban, and Laban said, "Even though you're a family, I should expect you to work for nothing. What can we do? What kind of wages do I need to pay you?" He said, "Give me your daughter Rachel as for my wife. That's the pay that I want." And Laban said, "Okay, you can work for me for 7 years. I'm not going to ask Tommy if he'd have worked 7 years to get Edna." So we just, you should have said 14, 20, whatever. You have to be careful. You can lose at that game no matter how he's answered. So here's the 3 translations of what it says about Leah and Rachel. Leah had ordinary eyes. It's the one we just read. Leah had ordinary eyes, but Rachel was shapely and beautiful. King James Version says, Leah had tender eyes, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Expanded Bible says Leah had weak eyes, frail, tender eyes, likely means unattractive, but Rachel was very beautiful. So we can kind of get that picture, no matter which one translation you're reading, that Rachel looked better than her sister Leah, who was the older one. And what attracted his attention was not because he thought she'd make a good wife, it's because she looked better. Isn't that typical? The way, if you got your choice. Okay, so what happened after that? He's going to work 7 years to get Rachel. So he works 7 years to get Rachel. It comes the day to get married, and he gets married. He goes into his dark tent to his bride, Rachel, and he wakes up in the morning and said, "That's not Rachel. That's Leah." I'm going to tell you, when I married Diana, she has an older sister. She had one sister who's older than her. If I had awakened the next morning and it was her sister laying there, I would have been ticked off. I would not have been a happy fella. And neither was he. And so Laban, though, he's got it all. He said, look, it's the custom in this area that the oldest daughter had to be married first. After all, I couldn't just have you to marry the younger daughter when she was not married. He said, so work for me 7 more years and I'll give you Rachel. He said, all I'm asking you to do is do the marriage week. They set aside a week for his marriage. And then the next week, he's got to work 7 more years, but the next week he could have Rachel. A lot of times we picture it as he worked 7 years, got Leah, then he worked 7 more years and got Rachel. That's not the way it happened. He worked 7 years, got Leah. He waited another week and got Rachel, and worked 7 years to earn the one that he already had. You didn't know? Read the scripture. Go back and look in the 29th chapter, see if I'm not telling you the truth. In fact, I might have it here. Let's see if we do. Yep. That's all it took, and has to work the rest of his life because of it. My guess is she was not happy. I would suspect, wouldn't you? Would you have been happy? After Jacob had stayed with him a month, Laban said to him, just because you're my relative, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. And Jacob loved Rachel. He answered Laban, I'll work for you 7 years for your daughter Rachel. Laban answered, this is not the custom, and this is going on further, it's not the custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the firstborn. Complete this week of the wedding celebration, and we will also give you this younger one in return for working yet another 7 years for me. And Jacob did just that. He finished the week of celebration, and Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. See, so learn something new. Because all the time we grew up in Sunday school, they said they had to work 7 years for this one and work 7 years. So you think it's 7 years and gets. Can you imagine if you were Jacob and you wanted Rachel and you wound up married to Leah? You'd work 7 years to get her, and then you had to work 7 more years to get Rachel. Would Rachel be happy? I don't know that Rachel was so happy that he had slept with her sister, to be quite honest. But what can we say? The customs were different back then, but he wound up with Rachel regardless. So we're going to cut it off there for tonight because there's not a good stopping place after that. Question and answers. You have questions, we have answers.